You lot know I've been on a bit of a political journey in my time, from Tommy Robinson rallies, appearing in a Nico video. Now I'm an official soyed out wokey. Yeah, blah blah blah, you've heard the story before. But you see, pretty much exactly a year ago I made a video called Did I Escape the Alt-Right Just to Be Brainwashed? I explained the story after leaving the right, like how far left did I go? At the time, landing as a social democrat. But that was a year ago. And boy oh boy has the world changed. A lot of things I believed even a year ago have basically been proven wrong. Not only that, making more and more videos delving into these topics deeper and deeper, I have also educated myself further. In my personal life, things have changed, and I feel like I have definitely landed on a different position now than then. So in this video, we will explore, have I become radicalized? Okay, so this time last year, I'm living in the UK, and I got to the point where I actually wanted to leave Britain. I was making so many depressing videos about the decline of Britain that I found myself applying for my Irish passport and I was going to get the fuck out of here. But then I had one day out in a town known as Brighton. Look at this beauty. Whoa, sun, sea, sandwiches. So jump forward to now, your boy is living in the capital of Wokistan. I got my Antifa membership card. This is pretty much as predictable as I could be. Yes, I moved to Brighton. And I will get into that more in a bit, but I want to talk about how just simply living here, this environment, this change of environment, has genuinely completely reshaped a lot of my feelings I had about Britain, the current state of Britain, and like the feeling of decline in this country. So for me to explain this to you, I really need to talk about the town I grew up in, Dunstable.
Next tonight, we all know about the pressures facing traditional town centre shops as giant shopping centres and online traders compete for our money.
But one town in our region seems to have a bigger problem than most. Dunstable in Bedfordshire now has the biggest exodus of shops of any town of its size in the country. But who's to blame?
Dunstable is kind of like the slightly better behaved brother of Luton. If Luton got life in jail, Dunstable got an ASBO. And it's these two towns, Dunstable and Luton, that if you look at them in the past, they were once thriving. They were nice places. I mean, look at that. That's not bad. And then jump forward to now. It's a little bit bleak. Luton, unfortunately, has a very bad reputation. It's infamous. It's home to Tommy Robinson, the EDL, Andrew Tate. It is a town that has a few problems. Dunstable specifically was one of the worst hit towns by the recession. When I was young, my experience of Dunstable as a town, as a community, was just a bit rough. Like if I went to the town centre, it was just dead, empty shops, graffiti everywhere, chavvy kids hanging around throwing Haribos at you. And this, when you're a young kid growing up, this has an effect on you.
With shops, there's at least 37 empty shops in Dunstable, and that's made a huge difference to us because people it's not worth coming to Dunstable.
Instead of growing up and going to the town and enjoying that, what me and my friends did was instead play video games. Eventually, as we got a little bit bigger, we would start going out to the woods, climbing trees, building cool shit, setting fire to things, blowing up aerosol cans. I'm sorry, Zach. And as I got older still, we got into the sport of parkour. And I've spoken about parkour before a little bit, but it's actually quite interesting just how impactful that is in shaping your experience of urban areas, your community, your town. Doing parkour, you actually kind of get an inverse relationship to urban areas than most people. If people like going to towns for restaurants and cafes and theaters, all this sort of stuff, for us, that was not the point of a town. If anything, the deader the town, the more neglected, the more brutalist the architecture, the better, because it meant that there was less people to get in the way. There was less security that was going to kick you off of the spots. So what parkour gave to me and many young people with little money was kind of like an alternative lifestyle, an alternative way of living and building a community. It became a way of creatively reimagining public space. A public space that when we were young, we couldn't afford to use it in the normal way. There was no way I had enough money to go to restaurants and all that sort of stuff.
You're the one that's come in threatening, telling us to fuck off.
Is that a threat?
What are you defining as a threat? What are you doing, bro?
I do.
What are you doing?
Because you all have to fuck off.
Listen, mate,
What
you're
are
on
you
camera,
doing?
you're acting like a weirdo. Yeah, your first thing you say is...
You're all on private property.
Listen,
We're doing parkour.
I realized when I look back, I never really felt connected or inspired by my local community. And in a way, growing up in a town like that, I kind of judged them. If my mum had to drag me to do some food shopping, I would see all the people there and they just looked like depressed old people plodding around a Sainsbury's. Or yeah, there were chavs sitting outside of the Tesco, or the same 5 locals sat in a rundown pub moaning about something they read in the Sun. For me as a young bruh, I didn't want to be that. I didn't see anything in that inspired me. And it's like that feeling of separation, like that adversarial nature to the local community, that I think, if I were to analyze my brain, is probably part of what led me to being a very anti-mainstream contrarian. A hipster prick, if you will. Back in September, I made a video. It's called Britain's New Class War. And I read this book about the rise of the petty bourgeois. This video really deepened my understanding of class. And I realized that by understanding class deeper, you actually start to understand what leads people to doing certain things. You know, why different people have different motivations, believe certain things, vote in a certain way. And it was reading this book where I, for the first time, understood my actual class background. So I grew up in a family that you could label as petty bourgeois. You know, that means just like a small capitalist. My dad was self-employed. He fit carpets, you know, he was in charge of his own work. Neither of my parents were educated. They didn't come from wealth. And they did well enough to buy a house. And for my mum to be a full-time mum for a fair few years, before we were big enough, she got a part-time job. And yeah, they had 2 kids. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't glamorous, but it was good. Never got all the new stuff that came out as and when it came out, but you know, I never was without. But you see, it's growing up in this very particular petty bourgeois type family where you are installed a certain set of beliefs and attitudes that are quite particular.
Yeah, and it was a totally different way of viewing the world, almost like the fetishization of like graft, you know, work as much as possible, you know, like work as much as possible until you drop. People's bodies are given up because they've been on the tools since they were like 16, but, you know, to give your family not just a good life, but like a nice life that you can also sort of show up.
You know, things like self-sufficiency. You do everything yourself. No one's going to come and help you. There's a real admiration of hard work, almost like glorifying it to a degree. And there's also a very real appreciation for the value of money. You don't spend frivolously. You know, you make sure you turn all the lights off. They were very frugal. They wouldn't waste things. And also, I would say there was this sort of feeling of wanting to prove others wrong. You were kind of proud that you were able to go at it yourself on your own. You didn't need other people's help. And look, I'll be totally honest, these characteristics have both good and bad in them. Like self-reliance and confidence are great. Being ambitious, being entrepreneurial also can be good. But what I have learned since getting a bit older is that these values do have a built-in limitation. And also growing up in the 2000s, I grew up on a shitload of basically American propaganda. Films, TVs, the people I idolized were always these self-made go-getters. I looked up to Eminem, Tyler, the Creator, you know, Skrillex, all these people who sort of came from nothing and built something amazing. The one dude bro just went out and did it on his own. Like, I loved that idea.
This is really crazy for me, man. Just a year and a half ago, I was making that song in my bedroom. I was actually living in an illegal warehouse space in downtown LA.
But these things, they do have like a built-in limitation to them, as it can lead you to believing that you can only ever rely on yourself. You can become a bit skeptical or maybe suspicious of the idea of like trusting in society or believing that your community can like collectively solve shared problems. The sort of every man for themselves mentality can just make you a bit skeptical. And it makes sense. It's completely understandable, because if you grow up in like a self-employed or small business owner family, there is no true stability. Not in the way like an employed family is, right? I would always hear my dad saying stuff like, you know, there's no days off for holiday. If I don't work, I don't eat. Pretty busy with work at the moment, mate, but you never know when it's going to go. Sick pay? You get paid for being sick? I have to pay to be sick. Yeah, you would hear this stuff all the time, and it's because it's true. You don't have employee benefits. You don't have the unionization, right? And so, yeah, it was learning more and more about my family and like class position, combined with also the reality of growing up in a town that was clearly declining. Both of these things in part shaped me and eventually would bleed into my politics. Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, Emma Sleep. Now, I'm one of them boys who needs a good night's sleep. If I don't get a good night's sleep, I will be a miserable prick, and ask my wife. She says she approves. Well, luckily, thanks to Emma Sleep and their new mattress they've given me, which is the original Pro mattress, I genuinely have been shocked how nice this mattress is. I didn't realize it would make such a difference. My old mattress was fine, I thought, and then I got this one, and it's a proper game changer. The ThermoSync technology gives advanced temperature regulation, so I'm just super hot at night. I get really, really hot. This bad boy takes care of that. It keeps you just regulated. It will regulate your temperature to be comfortable, so you get a complete uninterrupted night's sleep.
Whoa. Oh, it's nice.
Oh, it's softer. This much softer.
As well, there's like motion absorption. So if you're sleeping with your partner and you're a wormy boy like me who likes to wiggle around, you won't wake her up. The infinity pocket springs make it that you can just sleep in any position. I sleep on my front. This thing feels like a cloud. Like when I'm sleeping on it, it's just so comfortable. The mattresses have up to 10-year guarantee. You get a 200-day trial period, so you can just decide to send it back. Completely free shipping, free returns. I really honestly recommend it if you're looking to upgrade your mattress. Like, having a good mattress is an investment into yourself. Having a good night's sleep is needed. And check out Emma Sleep in the links below. You can use my code Jimmy the Giant to get an extra 5% off. Oh, and they're also running their big spring campaign throughout March, where you will receive 2 comfort cooling pillows and 1 mattress protector for free with your order of the original Pro mattress. Thanks again to Emma Sleep. Anyway, back to the video.
We have been predicting this nightmarish development for years. They need terrorism as a pretext to bring in the modern police state.
As an OG internet baby, I grew up on them conspiracy theories, man. 9/11 was an inside job, was just, you know, that was my version of Bluey. And I think it was this sort of, this contrarian nature mixed with being a bit overly confident that led me to choosing, when I got of age, to not go to university. I didn't see any merit in going to uni because I just knew exactly what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. And whilst I am thankful for having these traits, I realize now that this mix of being overly self-assured, combined with the fact that I was a contrarian and I just had natural curiosity in the world, these things became a dangerous mix. Because I rejected education and university, I had no deep foundational knowledge of history, of politics, of sociology. No, I just had fucking random YouTube videos. I was relying on 4-hour documentaries about the Rockefellers by user Truther567. Without having foundational knowledge, I had no real ability to distinguish good ideas from bad ideas. And as I say before, this skepticism I had developed towards like mainstream status quo culture meant that I was primed to be overly open to any idea that was contrarian to the norm. And I was hook, line and sinker for other people who would claim to be like an anti-establishment figure.
I want to be your voice. I want you to send a message like a bolt of lightning into the establishment.
So I ended up in this place where I thought Trump was cool and Tommy Robinson, Farage. For a good period of time, I was definitely one of these right-wing contrarians. And I think in that last video that I made talking about my political journey, I was able to analyze it in some degree, you know, why I was drawn to it. But I never really realized just how important things like your class position and your environment that you live in, how important these things are in installing lessons, expectations, and beliefs into people. But not just those things, but also recognizing that when you're young and you have lots of insecurities about your future, how you're going to get to the things that you're aspiring toward. And it's that can lead you to seeking out ideologies that give you what feels like concrete answers for the confusing world you're growing up into. Growing up in a town that feels in decline, into a society that tells you need to have a really good job, you need to matter, you need to have status, the nice wife, the car, the house, these sort of lessons you are being taught by media, by culture that you need to aspire toward for you to matter in this world and for you to be happy. And I think this is why I ended up such a firm believer in like free market capitalism, hustle culture, grind set, self-improvement. In part, I kind of needed to believe in the idea of meritocracy. If I'm being told that I need to have all these things or be all these things in order to, matter in the world, then believing the concept of meritocracy, if you just work hard and are really smart and you will achieve things, that will get you to where you need to be, then you grasp to these ideas as like a kind of life jacket.
Jeffrey's procrastinating again. Don't you have big dreams, Jeffrey? You said you wanted to be great. You said you were going to compete with Hamza and Andrew Tate. And now you're saying that you just want 1 hour at the end of a hard day to unwind and play League of Legends? If only you knew how to trick your brain to loving hard work.
And this is, one of the reflections I've probably had since last year, where I probably had a deeper belief in the idea of argumentation and debate in changing people's minds. It definitely plays a role, it's important. But the role of class, like material influence and people's emotional state, their identity, their desire to be something particular, these things that make an identity cannot simply be rationalized out with argumentation. I really do not believe that humans are rational actors who, you sit down, present them all the information, they'll pick the correct one. I believe that we as humans often seek out ideologies, religion, as kind of things that give us a sense of stability and peace, to make sense of the world and give us a small feeling of control over the chaoticness of life.
If they leave the cult, they will literally lose their identity. They will lose their sense of self and who they are. They won't know who to trust. They won't know where they belong. People in cults identify so strongly with the leader and beliefs that they fuse their own identity with the cult identity. This is a phenomenon called identity fusion, where a person's personal identity becomes fused with the identity of the leader or the group. That's why for Trump's followers, any attack on Trump or MAGA feels like a personal attack.
So to me, it makes a lot of sense why so many young guys get drawn towards red pill ideology. Ultimately, people want to have relationships, right? And these guys, they might not start out hating women, but because they obviously want to feel love, but also status and respect from other men. And they're told so many times growing up that if you don't have these things, you're not a real man, you're a loser, you're a virgin. Then stumbling on something like the red pill that tells you to be a dominant alpha man, that will get you the babes. Well, this can feel like a solution to that insecurity, to take you from where you are now to the place you want to be. And it's not just guys. I think it's the same with hyper-individualistic girl boss capitalism. There are creators that sell young women this idea that pure self-sufficiency and isolation, doing everything alone, like that lone wolf mentality, this will grant them protection from dependence, vulnerability, and disappointment. And the irony is, say the red pill, is that in reality, women find it repulsive. Girl boss capitalism can make women very isolated. Whether these ideologies actually deliver fulfillment in people's lives is kind of irrelevant. What they do is provide like a playbook, like a framework for you to act. That sense of control, that you understand it, you know what you gotta do, that helps people move in a direction rather than just sit and rot. At this point, these ideologies are just coping mechanisms. And this can be really tough, right? Somebody makes content where I like to go through arguments and debunk things. And whilst I've become more aware of the idea of like identity, I don't think people are unchangeable, obviously. I do believe that people can be educated out of positions. Life experience can change people, but it is to understand how deeply ingrained some of these beliefs can be in people and why they can't just let it go, even if it seems illogical.
If Jesus was here right now, would you let him in?
Of course I would.
Why?
As long as he went through the proper, as long as he
came here legally. As long as Jesus Christ came to this country legally, we would let him in.
And that is a big thing that I've learned this year. It wasn't just the fact that I changed my perspective through new information. That played a role, but I was in a position in my life, my career, to be open to taking new information. And I've become more aware of how difficult it can be to let go of certain ideas due to identity and someone's emotional state. All right, so jump forward a bit, right? Let's get back to the point. For a while, I was living in Milton Keynes. It's not a declining town per se, but it's a very corporate, soulless town. Did a whole video on that a while ago. It was built around the idea of like efficiency. In my opinion, it's soulless. In the center, the town isn't like walkable. You drive everywhere. You don't ever want to hang out in an urban environment. And so eventually I would decide to leave the city built on efficiency, and I ended up in Brighton. And I have to admit, living in Brighton has completely changed my perspective on modern Brighton. Brighton is just a beautiful place, right? It's vibrant. The buildings are colourful. There's artwork on all the buildings. It's by the sea. There's loads of nature. Architecture's incredible. There's endless cafes, restaurants, theatres, all high quality. Everyone cares about their craft. They do a good job. Independent cinema, fresh butchers, markets, vegetables. It's great. I can just literally leave my house and walk everywhere. I'm like in this environment all the time. And that feeling of just walking around this walkable town is amazing. This environment is what GB News is fear-mongering about. You know, the 15-minute city dystopia. Looks like hell, doesn't it? And what I noticed just immediately is the vibe of how people are. You know, when you see people out and about, it's got this kind of relaxed atmosphere. Not everyone feels like they're rushing to their corporate job. People are sitting out in the streets. They're enjoying themselves, talking with friends. Everyone's dressed cool. They're hip. And it was after living in this environment for a few weeks where I realized, my God, Britain is very divided. Where I grew up in Dunstable is just one example of so many places in the UK that are just not improving.
What's it like here in Wheatley Hill?
It's rough.
It's really rough.
Setting things on fire.
This town's crazier than we thought it would be. There's a lot more going on. How would you say it is? Should all. The horse, you use it for farming?
Still a baby. Things are just not what they used to be. It was a mining village then, years ago. And when all the pits around here closed, things changed.
The towns are stagnant. If anything, they're in decline. There is a feeling in lots of towns in the UK that their best days were behind them. And it's true, they were. Local pubs are shutting down. The industries that kept towns alive are sold off. High streets are derelict. They're just overrun by American corporate slop. Fast food, Poundlands, betting shops. Even Milton Keynes, you know, whilst it's not economically doing bad, there's just this, hollow corporate feel to the place. Everything in the town centre is just chain restaurants, low quality shit. Outside the town is just warehouses. There's no real soul to the place. And so, growing up, I'd always felt this feeling that nothing new and exciting was coming along. Nothing was breathing new life into places. I felt like most of my time was spent in places that were once good. I remember being stunned when I first saw images of how Dunstable used to look, how Luton used to look. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So my entire life experience in the UK was a feeling that my country gets worse every single year. It's a country in decline. And I cannot lie, after 1 month in Brighton, that feeling that I have always kind of had, it's just completely gone. If people ask me where I'm from, I'm proud to say I'm from Brighton. I'm like happy about it. You know, when I used to say I was from Milton Keynes, I would always kind of almost apologize for it. You expect the jokes. You expect someone to say, oh, they do the roundabouts. Yeah, they have roundabouts. That's a feeling I have literally never felt before. Never in my life have I ever been able to say, oh, I'm super proud of the town I'm from. I've not even thought about it. I want to zoom in on that feeling, right? I think it's important.
Can I ask what town you used to live in?
Medway in Kent.
Oh yeah, okay. And how does it compare to Brighton?
Oh, not comparable at all. Not at all.
Why is that?
Just a small town, small-minded people.
Okay.
Nothing's.
And in contrast, what's Brighton like?
Just bright, colourful, happy people.
Yeah.
I've met so many great people here that I never would have met in Medway.
Brighton, Manchester, Bristol, Edinburgh, London. These are towns that attract young people. Young people go there. They bring new ideas. The city feels like it's evolving, changing, moving in a direction. Feels like it's growing, and it feels like there is a shared sense of progress. And it's not to say none of these towns have problems, right? Brighton, the rent is way too high. Cost of living is fucked. There's drugs, lots of people living on the streets. But with all that still being true, there is not a feeling like this place is decaying. There is a visible sign of life and culture, community, and a general sense of shared progress. So what this means for us as a country is that if you're born into a town like Dunstable or many others, if you're fortunate, a lot of young people will move out of their hometown and they will go to one of these places. And when they go to these towns, they're naturally around people with a very similar mentality to them, similar age, similar cultural references, same music they like, same TV shows they reference. And they come together and they build these cool places, open shops, they make communities. And I've noticed this my whole life, but in the UK, there's an intense negativity towards young people, particularly young uni students in urban areas.
British universities are spending £30 million each year on diversity and inclusion schemes.
Matthew, what is going on in our universities?
Because they're a bunch of student politicians who have no idea how the real world works, have never set up and run large businesses, never hired and had to make payroll.
So is the higher education sector wasting money on woo?
They told him that he had made some students feel quite uncomfortable. He could have caused emotional harm to students.
Just this complete animosity. Like, the media belittles them, all the things that they care about, they will laugh at it. Like, the media always harps on about how students are out protesting Gaza or the environment or Black Lives Matter. And they'll focus on it and say, look how out of touch they are. They don't care about real Britannia. They're protesting all these big issues, but they're not talking about things in the country. And it is true, because in Brighton, you see it a lot. You see lots of LGBTQ flags, pride stuff. You see Palestine flags. And the GB Newses of the world make a real big fucking issue about that. They do not like that. And they'll use it and they'll point out, look, they don't care about you, Bob, in Wiggleswood, and the fact that your high street is shit. They're not out protesting that. And like, that might be true. They're not protesting about Wiggleswood High Street. But there is like an obvious reason why young students in urban environments tend to care and talk a lot about big political global issues. And that's because they're in university, learning about the world. They're studying history, geopolitics, philosophy. They are learning very interesting things about stuff that they were never taught growing up, that mainstream culture never talks about. When I was doing history in school, all we learned about was King Henry VIII, and we did a little bit about the Nazis. We didn't learn about the Bengali famine, the Amritsar massacre, burning of villages in Kenya, all by the British colonial powers. We didn't learn much about that and how that shaped the world that we live in right now. It's quite shocking if you've never been told that. So yeah, you might become interested in these topics about colonialism, global conflicts, the environment, capitalism, feminism, LGBTQ. You might talk a lot more about that than Wiggleswood High Street. These students are loaded with all this new information and they're passionate about it and they want to talk about it. And also, you got to bear in mind, sort of materially, students do have very different concerns than working people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, right? Even if they're not well off, they've just come out of living at home with their parents, now they're on a student loan, they're not immediately exposed to the sort of same material conditions that we are as working adults. In uni, they have a few years of stability before they enter the working world, where they will become more and more focused on these more material problems. And as well, the nature of being a student, they have more time to go and do protests. They're around similar people, they can go and organize it, right? We're too busy working. We're all disconnected. And instead of celebrating the fact that students were able to bring some of these causes into mainstream discourse and make us reflect on them, which is quite impressive, being that they're students and have basically no powerful stake in society at all, instead of encouraging that energy and supporting the, the political organization and passion, instead we just ridicule them and brush them to a side. But you see, this plays a role in the culture war, where you can create a cultural separation between the lives, the concerns, and the things they talk about of uni students and other people in the country. And that can be used to create conflict.
That we are living amid the rise of a new ruling class in the country that is comprised of elite university graduates from Oxbridge, Russell Group universities who tend to live in the cities or the university towns.
Whilst it's probably true that students might be talking more about the environment than, say, house prices, childcare costs, energy bills, wage stagnation, right? It's probably true they don't talk about that as much. And here's the thing, that's fine that they don't. They're students. They aren't our leaders, nor are they powerful. They're allowed to be interested in and concerned about what is interesting and concerning to them. However, these sneaky politicians, these political pundits, love to focus and obsess over student protests and create a wedge issue and a separation between the different areas in Britain. Towns like where I live in Brighton. If I say to some random reform supporter, I'm from Brighton, he will immediately roll his eyes. Brighton, is it? The gay town? That's where the gays are at, isn't it? The gays. A lot of gays in that town, isn't there? What do they wear? How do they smell? Oh, just asking. Stupid Brighton. That's what these pundits do, right? They focus on, woke students caring about Gaza. Meanwhile, you have problems in your declining town. And I think when I was younger, I used to fall for that, right? I never went to uni. I weren't living in one of these nice, young, thriving metropolitan towns. So I would laugh at them. I'd watch these SJW compilations and I would feel a certain sense of separation and animosity toward them. And I think to look at it on the other side, when you live in Brighton, if you are one of these students, there is a feeling of disconnect to the rest of the country because you are not living in an area which is declining. I think genuinely, and this is what I'm experiencing here, is simply by living in a place that feels culturally rich, that feels alive, connected, and is moving forward, means that the topic of Britain in decline is just not felt the same way anymore. I used to feel it. When I'd walk around my town, I would see it. It felt like this country was stagnant. I don't feel that now. And I just can't help but see how clever it is of the politicians and the pundits in driving this wedge between the country. This animosity between, declining urban areas and rural areas, between the sort of more progressive young urban areas. They're painted as like cultural enemies.
And the new elite, which is not really defining itself by wealth and money, it is defining itself by its social liberalism, its radical woke progressivism, comes from the universities, affluent families, lives in the cities.
But they haven't ruled the country for 50 years, have they?
And I think the whole, woke, liberal, urban stereotype is weaponized in a sort of misdirection. And it's quite smart because, in urban areas, you do have very wealthy people. You do have very powerful people. The politicians, the media, they are in these areas. London is Parliament, right? It has the bankers, the CEOs, the elites. They're all in the same area. And so there's this sort of painting with a broad brush, a redirection away from the powerful toward the cultural side, blaming the woke, the liberal, the progressive, the cultural values of members of that society, tying them all together and creating this idea of the liberal metropolitan elite. And what this does in reaction to all of the other parts of Britain that see these areas, get told all these things about them, they, in response to it, create a reactionary identity. They build their own identity, their beliefs, their values around rejecting what they perceive these sort of woke urban progressives to care about. I can't think of a better example of this than the divide over Israel and Palestine between Green voters and Reform voters. We know that the Greens are very popular amongst young urban people, whilst Reform get very little support under the age of 50, but loads of support of older people and people from poorer, declining areas. And so we see it with the Green voter tends to be very pro-Palestine, and the Reform voter is weirdly pro-Israel. Like more pro-Israel than anyone else. Now, do we really expect that this is because, Reform voters have some deeply held pro-Zionist positions, like a really thought out analytical study of this topic? Or is it simply because the guy on GB News says that the young people support Palestine and they don't like seeing the Palestine flag? I'm gonna say, I think it's that.
I want a national unifying politics which puts Britain first, not Pakistan, not Gaza, not any other foreign policy thing, Britain first.
Not Israel?
Well,
not Israel. The media's just been talking about Israel and the IDF for the last 4 or 5 days. That's what they talk about. You wouldn't think that high streets in this country are on the, are on the way down, or public services aren't doing well, or people are struggling with their bills. I hear so much about Israel.
Is that a fair point?
Well, my personal view is Israel is a very close ally. Well, until recently, it was a very close ally of the United Kingdom. We should look after our allies.
The other place I see the massive divide in places like Brighton and, young urban areas and other parts of the UK is over immigration. So, okay, let's take the phrase, Britain doesn't feel like Britain anymore. You've probably heard this one before. Probably your uncle at Christmas, after having about 6 pints and he smells like fags, comes up to you and goes, "Come here, little Bobby. Britain, right? You've heard of it. Don't feel the same, mate. Britain's not Britain. It's probably Bristani, isn't it?" Your immediate response is to, you understand it's shorthand for I don't like immigrants. And so therefore it's very easy to dismiss and just pass off as being racist. Whilst that is true, right, I do believe within this expression contains a genuine concern or feeling over the cultural and public decline or stagnation of many parts of Britain. Like, think about it, right? In areas with really high immigration, but also a lot of growth, for example, London, if you poll people on their opinion of multiculturalism, they really like it. In fact, they're proud of it, right? You see this in all the surveys of Londoners, you know, and that's because for them, they love the idea that, you know, after their job, they go to a Japanese pancake shop, then they go to the Turkish barber, and then maybe on the way home, they go to a gallery to see some Nigerian modernism. The idea that London doesn't feel like London anymore is basically never said by Londoners, because Londoners who are in London, shock horror, like London. But very often, the people that say London doesn't feel like London don't live in London. Why is that?
You begin to ask yourself, what has happened to the identity of our country? I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, John Cleese, who's a very, you know, Liberal Democrat leaning, sort of centre-left figure, said that he fails to see London anymore as being an English city. So do you agree with that, Mr. Roche? Well, in parts of London, I do, yes.
Well, I do think in these expressions holds a nostalgia for the past. If they say it used to feel like Britain, I really just think it's nostalgia for a period in which they were young, having families, buying their first home, in a period of time where in their town new businesses were opening. The British economy was growing. They were having new experiences. The world was changing, but it was changing with them. Jump forward to now, where many of these towns that were once growing are now declining. Shops are shutting. People are getting older. The young people don't want to grow up there. They move away. Major employment from the big industries that were there are shut now. The pubs are closing. The local butcher is now an Asda. And like, I'm not going to lie, I feel for them. That's sad. How many times do you see these posts on Twitter where it's like a picture of a high street in the 90s and there's just happy people shopping? It's obvious. They're feeling depressed. I don't mean it in an insulting way. I mean it like genuinely, because, you know, happy high streets for people enjoying themselves still exist, but they exist here in places like Brighton, in London, and they exist less and less in the places that they are from. Most anti-migrant, pro-reform areas in the country rarely even have immigration. However, you do notice in some places that have a lot of immigration, but people are more resentful and bitter towards it, it is often in towns that are generally declining. The migrant community moves in, their community sees progress, new shops, new businesses, etc. Their lives are progressing and moving forward, but the people who were there before, their lives aren't moving and progressing in the same way. And it's in that where I do believe a feeling of resentment can grow.
So I'm 33 now. I've worked since I was 15, paid all my life. Yep. And I'm scared to walk the streets of here. I'm still living at home with my mum and dad because I've got no chance. Yeah. It's just a joke, isn't it? The country and the way it's going.
But you're still living at home?
Yeah.
With your parents?
Yeah.
And because getting a home's impossible?
Can't be done. I could get a house share, but then you're living with, again, weirdos, men from different countries that are threatening towards us.
Like, I saw this firsthand in Luton. That is the story. The political story of Luton is effectively that. You have this area called Bury Park. It's got a large South Asian population. And I used to work here. I'd go there and you would see a very thriving high street there. It's got a vibrant community, you know, local food, different clothing shops for all the different things they want. Like, it's really quite alive and I quite like it. However, there was a group of people that did not like this. If you think about the white British person that lived in Luton, maybe since like the 70s. Back then, the town centre was probably doing quite well. It was probably thriving. Luton was known for, over time, many different industries. It used to have the hat factories, but then later it had like the Vauxhall garages, and these employed lots of people and they were well-paid jobs. But then over time, as we deindustrialised, these factories shut down. The jobs went with them. And so the locals who'd grown up in Luton their whole life that liked Luton, lots of them had to leave to find new work. And for the ones that didn't leave and were left behind, the centre of Luton stopped evolving and just started to decline. Most of us don't like big shopping centres now, but back in the 70s and 80s, these would have all been cool and modern and exciting. But over time, it's just seen, more places shut down. The area looks old and it looks like it hasn't been updated in a long time. And it's the same boring corporate slop that you find everywhere else. The area has had more crime problems, more drug problems. There is just a sense of decline and stagnation in Luton Centre. So Bury Park became this weird point of tension. The EDL, this was Tommy Robinson's group, they would go out of their way to go to Bury Park into that community and fuck with them. You'd see all these far-right groups go and do that. Some would travel, some weren't even from Luton and they would travel to it. Like, I just can't help but feel that there is probably a sense of jealousy that the Asian community is moving forward and seeing progress, whereas I guess the white British community hasn't seen the same progress. Most of the youngsters leave.
This area now is literally just a complete Muslim area. It's got 19 mosques all within a stone's throw. and plans for another 6.
And I think it's that, right? It's when multiculturalism enters areas of decline or areas of progress. That is the ground in which there can be cultural resentments. Because the difference in how multiculturalism is felt in London, where people like it, enjoy it, celebrate it, and although people will say Bury Park, well, the difference is because there's only Muslims there. I mean, London has the same thing. It has whole areas that is just mainly Muslim communities, but the animosity in there just doesn't exist the same, because the difference is everyone feels like their lives are progressing, moving forward. The young people that go to London, as well as immigrants that move to London, and the different multicultural communities, things are generally moving in a direction. And so in that context, multiculturalism doesn't get interpreted as a threat or something to be envious of, because each community is satisfied themselves. And I'm really trying to make it clear, I think it's this feeling that a person might struggle to understand truly if they've grown up or spent lots of time in these more urban progressive areas. Because here, in these areas, your experience of multiculturalism is that of shared progression. You don't feel envious or threatened by other communities' success because you're satisfied culturally yourself. And I think that environment creates the attitude of being more open, more tolerant, more accepting, and also more willing to get involved with different communities, share culture. And I want to be really clear here, it's not the migrants that cause the problem. Because if you look at a town like Luton, the migrant communities tend to be bringing new life to it. They're the things that are kind of keeping it alive, right? Because they're bringing new blood into the area.
So I used to work up there, so I didn't go deep into it very often, but I would like walk from about here there. So I first came there, I was intimidated in the sense that it was alien. Like, I can't say it wasn't alien. But then over a while, you're like, they are just normal people. I got into Tommy Robinson after, and I remember him talking about Bury Park, and I remember even thinking, listening to him, I was like, Bury Park's not bad, it's quite nice.
The blame has to land on politicians. The politicians who create the economic conditions of declining urban areas through pushing deindustrialization and pushing austerity. They are to blame. They cause the decline in these towns. But because these cynical politicians don't want to take the blame themselves, they and the media pundits will manipulate people into blaming the migrants. And they'll say, oh, it's them. That's why your town doesn't feel the same anymore. So that people obviously don't blame the billionaires and the politicians and the powerful people that cause the decline in your community. And it can be very easy, and I do it myself, like it's very hard not to be overly moralistic and look at these people and blame them for their bigotry. And like, yeah, people are responsible for their own thoughts and what they believe. But ultimately, I do believe that very often they have a genuine concern over the decline of their town, and they're just incorrectly diagnosing the problem because of manipulative figures in the media. I think you have to have empathy for that feeling, that they very likely grew up once proud of their town, of their community, of where they lived. They were happy about it. No one wants to live in a town where you have to say, yeah, it's shit. You know, you don't want to be like, yeah, I live in Blackpool, it's a shithole. No one wants that. And having lived through it once being a good place and now having to just accept that you live in a place that has declined, that is something we need to take very seriously and do something about. Having a sense of pride and a connectedness with your local community, I genuinely now finally have experienced that firsthand. And that alone affects your entire worldview of the country, how you feel about the country. Right, so we've done all that, right? That's personal life, sort of new things I've learned, how it's made me change what I think and feel about shit. This year in the videos I've made has really helped teach me a much deeper foundational knowledge that has not only allowed me to make videos and know more about politics, but also be able to reflect on myself and my upbringing more. And so with all that said, I will admit that over the last year, I have definitely become much more radicalized against capitalism. Because me, as an individual, I can be very critical of unregulated capitalism. However, I really like capitalism. In the last video I did, I placed myself as a social democrat. I sort of had the worldview that capitalism was natural and inevitable. There was no other way of operating the world, so we had to accept capitalism and just put loads of rules and restrictions on it so that we don't end up returning to like chimney sweeps. But yeah, since then, I've learned a lot more about capitalism. And I realized my understanding of capitalism, my belief in it, was built on basically a misunderstanding of what capitalism is. I'd been taught to think, like most people, that capitalism just means markets, people trading, innovating, competing. Now, I would say my understanding of capitalism is very different. Capitalism is a very specific system of deciding that resources in the world will be distributed via the pursuit of profit. This system requires a very rigid legal framework to enforce it. It doesn't exist naturally.
We are all brought up to believe or to think that it is just the way of the world, it is human nature to want to accumulate things and wealth and to have the freedom to choose what you want and what your destiny is.
So the first point is to escape the mental trap that naturalizes the system, that makes us think exactly what you just said, which is that we have a spontaneous tendency towards this capitalist economy. What I show in the book is that capitalism is far from spontaneous. It requires constant, violent enforcement of those policies of austerity to preserve the system in place.
This is a system of intellectual property rights and private land ownership, and I guess a legally recognized currency. All of these things are then enforced globally under the threat of state violence without a massive government that can throw you in jail if you decide you don't want to work for money but instead grow some fruit and veg on a plot of land. But you don't own a piece of paper that says you own the plot of land. And actually the great-great-great-great-grandson of some aristocrat hundreds of years ago owns the piece of paper. And if you dare grow that fruit and veg on that land, he'll get the police to throw you in jail. If you don't have that system in place, you don't have capitalism. When we tried to set up capitalism in Australia, the prisoners who were meant to work on the colonies just escaped and became self-sufficient. We had to legally control all of the land and enforce it with our military in order for capitalism to exist as a system. Knowing this, having this understanding, the knowledge that this is not a natural system that just emerges organically, has fundamentally changed my belief in how you go about in creating a stable society that provides a decent quality of life for all. You know, which is what most people claim they want, right? People just believe that capitalism will get us there. Now, for a long time, I've rejected the idea that just more growth and more capitalism will result in better living standards. I don't believe that. It seems to me that any time technology comes in that could give us more free time, whether it's the washing machine or AI and automation, all that seems to happen is what should be more free time for the worker just turns into more potential time to earn wages. So even though we've become more productive, that free time becomes more potential work time. And so you end up just working more. So whilst I've not believed in that kind of capitalistic growth for a long time, I did for a period of time genuinely believe that you can have capitalism, but we just need to return to like a post-war consensus regulated form of capitalism. So you're still fundamentally gearing your society around profit and growth, but you introduce higher taxes, unionization, strong regulations. And if you do that, I believed, you know, things would go back to normal and work better for people.
We were thinking in terms of a new world. The returning soldiers deserved a decent environment, and that was really the main task. And we thought that we'd been called by chance and by our place in history to create that new world.
Now, whilst in this current climate, if someone came along and offered that, I would probably, I'd accept it. I am a pragmatist. The thing that separates me from thinking that that's a be-all and end-all is that I really underestimated just the nature of power, of wealth, and how it accumulates over time. So, like, even under this post-war system, Keynesianism, wealth and power still accumulates, but it does so just over a slower period of time. It wasn't an era without exploitation. Our workers, we might have been slightly less exploited and had better living standards, but the more you learn about colonialism, global politics, you realize that we were just brutally extracting wealth from the global south, causing major instability, death, and, bad stuff. So yeah, as this wealth still accumulated, inevitably over time, that wealth will be used to make the system work more in its favor, to ensure its own survival and to maintain its power. When the whole Thatcher-Reagan era happened, the thing that undid the post-war consensus, the social democracy era, and brought in neoliberalism, I have since stopped seeing that as like a political misstep, that we were just all duped and suckered into the voting the wrong way, like an accident. Now I see that outcome, the undoing of progress, as an inevitability. Under that system, wealth and capital was always going to grow powerful enough to remove all of the guardrails we had put around it. And like, when you zoom out globally, it becomes even darker. Over the last few decades, an enormous amount of wealth has been extracted and funneled towards America, into the American financial system. All of it pooling into one place, and it's all of this money going to America, getting concentrated there, that starts creating a political pressure on the rest of the world and starts destabilizing democracies globally. American capitalism became so powerful that we are seeing daily how it is reshaping the rest of the world, arguably against its own will. It started all the way back with Thatcher when she opened up the UK to American capital. Back then, we used to protect many industries from falling into the hands of private billionaires. But as it's continued over years and years, as we've sold off so many things to the Americans and other people, we have literally become a nation that has no sovereign wealth. We own, collectively, basically nothing.
Private water companies are dumping huge amounts of raw sewage in Britain's rivers and off its coastlines. They're doing so to save money, to ensure returns for shareholders, and by extension, to guarantee massive salaries for bosses at the top. According to the Environment Agency, raw sewage was pumped into rivers and coasts 375,000 times in 2021. That's more than 1,000 times a day on average.
And just seeing this happen in our country, how we've just been, just asset stripped by the Americans, and politically we've become so subservient to them. The BBC, Keir Starmer, they're terrified to criticize Trump now. I really feel a deep sense of shame of how subservient we've become to America, and it's this that has really changed my position.
The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request.
Under the pursuit of social democracy, so, capitalism with guardrails, you're kind of just hoping that you get a leader who believes in nice vibes capitalism, a good guy. But if you don't change the nature of how ownership works, then eventually you're always going to get the same outcome. You're always going to get one very ruthless billionaire who will find a way to pay off enough politicians to buy out the think tanks and the media, to manipulate the voters and break the guardrails that you have put in place to prevent all of the bad shit. And it's inevitable because, if you are the type of person to accumulate £1 billion, you can only do that if you are willingly and knowingly exploiting workers. This takes a particular kind of person, like a sociopathic person, one who places human suffering below their personal interests. As their wealth grows, they buy more stuff, they outcompete everyone. And ironically, the idea of capitalism and innovation, competition, disappears. They beat the competition. There's now less room to innovate. And so we stop seeing innovation, and increasingly we see shitification, where we find people paying a subscription service to heat their own car seats. And so in that system that allows billionaires to exist, it just takes one fucking Elon Musk, one neo-Nazi to come in and impose their worldview on everyone else. And you kind of know this in theory, but seeing it real time, him buying Twitter, turning it into a far-right propaganda pipeline, seeing what that has done to the culture, to the world, just seems inevitably that capitalism will eventually descend into fascism.
So I think there's frankly too much of a focus on past guilt, and we need to move beyond that. Children should not be guilty of the sins of their parents, or even let alone their parents, their great-grandparents maybe even. And you should be optimistic and excited about a future for Germany. That's really my message. It's be optimistic, excited, and preserve German culture and protect the German people.
And it's not just Elon Musk, right? He's just the most fucking brazen. He's so obvious. All of the major media has been owned by billionaires for a very long time. Rupert Murdoch has Britain under his thumb and has done for many decades. In large part, he controls politics in this country. Why? He's just some fucking guy. Yet we have to live basically under his will because he has shitloads of money and can control the media. He doesn't even live in Britain, for fuck's sake. And I'm not saying anything revolutionary. We all know this to a degree. But for me, it's really been this Trump presidency where it's just been so blatant. There's so much corruption, so much evil shit happening. And the fact that here in my country, lots of people are being lied to and manipulated into supporting reform, which is just the British arm of MAGA, and we've just self-destructed. You know, we left the EU, it's been incredibly bad for our economy, and we just keep making terrible decisions. It becomes impossible to believe that this can stop, that capitalism can ever truly be tamed. And it's got me to a point where I stop asking, how do we manage capitalism better? And start asking, what if we just don't let power, wealth, and capital accumulate like this in the first place? So, lay my cards out. This is where I'm at right now politically. I'm not a communist, despite every single fucking right-winger saying it. Anyone who doesn't hate migrants is a communist now, apparently. And I'm definitely not a tanky, despite having become very anti-American imperialism. You know, for the obvious fucking reasons. They're trying to invade our neighbors and destabilize our country, agitating the far right all around Europe, financially backing them. But yeah, where I separate from tankies is that they often just see America as like the root of all evil, that they're exceptional, that American imperialism is like the worst thing ever. I tend to view it that imperialism is imperialism. I've seen it firsthand with Russia, my connection to Ukraine through my wife. It's the same shit. They do the same thing. The history of the way they've treated different nations under the USSR is exactly the same as how America treats the world. It's just a structural thing, right? Competing imperial powers do the same types of things as they have the same structural incentives. And that's where like China comes in as an interesting case, because China too suffers these same problems. Because yeah, definitely I look at China and I see the progress in that nation, and you see it and you're like, damn, I wish we had the high-speed rail. I wish we were building cool shit. And it can be quite easy to glorify China right now. And this is where there's nuance, right? I want to be able to look at China and the progress they've had, be able to analyze it like, okay, there are certain things that they do that we should definitely do. Their ability to coordinate things from a state level, rather than always relying on different private contractors to do different things. They do it centrally through the government. This means they can do more long-term planning. Things like the sort of hybrid between having private and state companies, where the state owns certain percentage of private companies. I look at that and I'm like, yeah, there's definitely stuff we can learn from that. But very importantly, I do not want us to be like China. I want more and more democracy. I want people to be involved in their local councils, local governments, and have a say over their area. China is a hyper-authoritarian state, has major human rights abuses, and because power is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, it always leads to something bad in the long term. So for me, if I had to put a label on my views, I would say that I am a democratic socialist. His labels are annoying, you know, but I would say I'm pragmatic. I'm not one of those people that can't work with someone who is slightly different to me. I really care more about outcomes than just being aligned ideologically. Practically, how I would envision the world is that I would like a state that has much more control over key industries, so that we don't rely on billionaires. In fact, I wouldn't allow billionaires. I would tax them into oblivion. I don't believe individual people should have that much power. But you need to balance this if you're going to do things that are state-owned with increased democratic participation. You want more unionization, strong collective bargaining powers, more cooperatives, and yeah, more local political involvement. I look at things like Singapore, that the state owns most of the land, whereas Britain, all of the land is privatized. Over there, they're able to build amazing housing. You can still buy a home there, but the land always stays public. And this basically cures the housing crisis. You remove landlords and rentier capitalism. I think it's insane that the person who makes the highest amount of profit in your local coffee shop, after all of the workers, people who grow the bean, do all the stuff, the person who makes the most money is the person who owns the piece of paper that says they own the land. It's bullshit. So ultimately, I want our system built around the pursuit of social interest over profit. I want much more state ownership and state coordination so that we can do massive house building projects, high-speed rail. I want to have the 5G internet. I want green energy. All of these things. We have so many projects in this country that need doing. So much infrastructure work that could give people good construction jobs that are paid well if we stop coordinating everything through private contractors who just squeeze money out of us, deliver a shit service, and take forever to do it. Post-war Britain, we were able to build 32 new towns because we centrally planned it. We did it in-house, and we didn't rely on all these private contractors. So yeah, this isn't a complete manifesto. I'm not going to go through every single policy idea or things like that, but just to give you a general vibe of where I'm roughly at politically and like the philosophy I operate from. I believe a society should work collectively to create better social outcomes for everyone. I think hyper-individualism and privatization make it basically impossible for us to act collectively because there's too many competing interests. And so if power isn't evenly distributed across society between workers, the middle class, the wealthy, I think that system will always pull towards the wealthy and eventually it'll collapse. So our focus as society should be about making decisions around public good and not profit.
Because life has changed. Instead of working for a nice life, we're working to line the pockets of billionaires. We are being bled dry, and I don't think it's extreme or radical to think working hard should get you a nice life. And I don't think that if you're not able to work, that you should still have a nice life. I think that absolutely everybody should get a nice life.
So yeah, that's where I'm at. That's what's changed over the year. I'm very curious to see where you guys are at, what your journeys have been. So comment that below. And I'm curious where I'm going to be at in a year's time and who I'm going to piss off then. So if you enjoyed that video, be sure to support me on Patreon. It massively helps the channel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.